Hello, and welcome to the Physical Therapy Owners Club podcast. I'm Nathan Shields, and today I'm bringing back a guest who's come on with us in the past. He has contributed significantly to monthly articles in the Impact magazine of PPS and is currently the director of marketing at Physical Therapy and Sports Medicine Centers in Connecticut. Peter Decoteau. Did I say it right?
Yes,
Decoteau.
you did actually.
Did I
Yeah.
say it right? Okay,
The
cool.
rarity. Yeah.
It rolled off the tongue, so I'm glad I hit it. Thanks for joining me, Peter. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me back.
Yeah, it's good to have you on because you bring a marketing perspective that's not, you're not a physical therapist. So you bring the marketing perspective and apply that to physical therapy, which is not common amongst physical therapy owners. We don't have a marketer like you, right, that is overseeing this, that has a background in it. So it's nice to get your perspective on how to generate and do better marketing on behalf of our physical therapy clinics. For the sake of the audience, would you just remind us a little bit about who you are, where you came from, and what you're doing?
Yeah. So as you said, I'm the director of marketing currently for Physical Therapy and Sports Medicine Centers in Connecticut. We are Connecticut's largest private practice physical therapy provider. We currently have 31 locations throughout the state. So my experience in marketing started in the nonprofit world, maybe 10 to 15 years ago. And then I moved on to working with a private school for a little bit in Connecticut, and then worked for an agency for a bit where we worked with education, banking, and healthcare. So I did get a start in healthcare working with an agency and had been doing some freelance work for the group that I'm with now, and then moved to this group, PTSMC, full-time when they were looking for a full-time marketing director. So, I'd gotten my toes wet a little bit in the industry, but certainly had a lot to learn, and have been with PTSMC for 5 years now, just over 5 years, and have learned a ton from the PTs and the owners and all the experienced professionals that I work with every day, and hopefully bring a lot to them to learn about marketing as well.
Definitely. And you guys have a full-blown marketing strategy. You have different strategies, a whole kinds of plans and programs and whatnot. But today we want to focus a little bit on content. And for me, simply generating content is like, it's like nails on the chalkboard to sit down and have to write and find something that is, number one, engaging, and number two, is worthwhile, is just, I hate doing it. So what you're going to share with us today is a little bit about content strategy. And I think it's going to help me as well, hopefully helpful listeners as well, generate better content that's more engaging and pulls people in.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, you kind of try to avoid, or certainly don't look forward to doing the content piece, because that's one of the things that getting into marketing I most look forward to. I started as in my education in journalism, so kind of creative on that end, doing copywriting and journalism writing, reporting, and all that stuff. And then in working with some of the other places I was with, got really into design and information design and multimedia and video and stuff like that. So it's something that I think if you're more creatively minded, you look forward to it. And I think in as much as PTs get very creative with their treatment methods and looking for exploring new ways to treat their patients, maybe this is not that version of creativity that they look for. So, in putting together the idea of content strategy and content marketing, I try to rip the Band-Aid off a little bit from that process and try to make it so that you can plan it out and be very kind of strategic and considered with what you're doing, so that there's more of an analytical or kind of scientifically based approach to putting your content together that maybe scratches that kind of more scientific itch that the PTs tend to have, as opposed to the creative part of it. But I do want to clarify first that when we talk about content strategy and content marketing, I think about those things as two different things. One is kind of the higher level piece of the other. So content strategy, and we do at PTSMC with my department, we put together a content strategy annually that kind of works into our entire kind of marketing strategy, that works into the entire organizational strategy and the goals that we're trying to reach. That is just the broad roll up of everything you're trying to do in terms of messaging and branding and brand awareness and audiences that you're trying to reach. in a very kind of considered and goal-oriented way. The content marketing piece is the actionable execution of that strategy. So
Right.
the strategy really is based on everything that you can do to attract, engage, and retain either prospective patients or past patients, to get them back and retain them as people within your audience base. And the content marketing is everything that you're doing, all the tactics that you do to execute on that.
Oh, okay, good. And it's something, of course, the content strategy is necessary to come from the owners and leadership team, and like you said, from a higher perspective. When you look at this and say someone in a smaller clinic develops a content strategy like we're going to talk about today, do you have any qualms against maybe then working with someone on Upwork or something like that to then develop the content? Do you have any issues or recommendations like with that? Because if an owner develops a strategy but doesn't necessarily want to or have the team in place to then generate a lot of content, have you found that being successful using a third party?
Yes, definitely. I think, we are at PTSMC in a privileged position of having a marketing department. From my perspective as the director, the department could always be bigger and have more people and more professionals doing their kind of niche work. But we have the people to do the graphic design and the web work and the copywriting and the relationship development, in that they're taking the content out to the audiences kind of interpersonally. So we kind of try to create that kind of cross professional avenue for the content. But it is something that's come up a lot at PPS with the marketing committee and the administrative network, which I'm also a part of, in how do we approach introducing these concepts of marketing strategy and specifically content strategy to clinic owners or clinicians who do not have a marketing team. So if you can put together a strategy that at least focuses on key goals, key metrics, and KPIs, those key performance indicators, things that you're trying to achieve, and breaking down the key messages that you're trying to really reinforce, the brand identity that you have, the key platforms that your audience might be on, the key media that they're going to be engaging with. If you can create those things and kind of break that down and make it very clear, then you're putting yourself on a good path to have someone actually execute on it. So bringing in somebody who may not be familiar with either the industry or your particular organization creates a little bit of a gap that you need to cover in terms of getting them on board, or at least, kind of getting them into the clinic so that they can be working with the clinicians. But it gives them a really good idea of what your goals are, and, what the key messages are that they should be kind of enacting to try to achieve those goals. So there is a way to do it. It just requires a lot of consideration and kind of planning on the part of the clinician.
So using someone off of that kind of website would be beneficial, but they're going to be, would you say, a little bit lost in the woods if you don't have a strategy like this in place? Like they're starting from scratch when you're expecting some kind of branded content and specific to certain demographics and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't have all of those things that I was talking about, you're going to be missing a piece of it.
Okay.
If you don't have goals, obviously, then you're just kind of putting things out there. To what end? Whenever we talk about what is good content, the first thing what is good content marketing, good content strategy, the first thing I would say is, well, it is not, just posting something every day that's just like photos of people in your clinic, or reposting news links, or reposting videos from other people, or memes from other people, because you're not really telling a story, you're not really pushing towards any kind of goal, you're not generating leads, you're not converting those leads. So starting there is important, but also having brand messaging, a brand identity, a personality that is consistent, and conveying that to the person who's putting the content together will all kind of help in concert with making sure that the right message is reaching the right audience, and you're creating a form of awareness, engagement, recall that will end up converting the people into patients, or getting them back as patients, because otherwise you're just kind of like talking into the void.
Got it. And so you've mentioned a few portions of what makes up a content strategy, but just to clarify, where do we start when we're looking at developing content strategy. And, you know, feel free to take us through the process. And if you don't mind me asking questions here and there, I'd appreciate it. But,
Sure.
but where do we start if we're thinking, okay, I'm going to develop a content strategy? Where does it start?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing you do is you figure out who you are as a brand, as a PT provider. What are the things that these are like really high level? You probably, you know, have these things as a part of your marketing strategy, but if you don't have them, then you can start there.
So you're talking like your purpose, your values, your
Yes,
vision,
yeah,
mission, that kind of stuff, right?
all that stuff, and how that fits into your brand identity in as much as it differentiates you from the other PT providers in your
Yes.
area, in your state. So it's not just that you have those things, but how do those things make you different, better, unique? I mean, it might not make you better overall, but it might make you a better provider for, athletes or for elderly people or post-op or whatever.
Right.
So you start there, and hopefully you already have that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking strictly at starting the content strategy, you start with what are your goals? And when I say goals, I mean like hard level, like mostly we're talking about getting new patient volume or visit volume. I
Okay.
mean, that's typically what we're talking about. You
Right.
can be a little bit more specific than that and talk about, well, we have enough new patients when it comes to referring doctors, but we want to beef up our direct access patients, our self-referred
Okay.
patients. So maybe that's the goal. And then
Or
what
how
are
do
the,
we get past patients re-engaged? How do we get
yep,
them coming
exactly.
back?
Yep.
Because those are
Re-engage.
low-hanging fruit, right? You want to stay
Yes.
in touch with them. So how do we get them engaged? So you have to have those kind of goals and focuses, right?
Definitely. Yep. And you might say new patient volume is the thing. So where is the low hanging fruit? Or you might say, we want to focus on, you know, maybe our clinics are maxed out with new patients, but we want to shift our patient base to younger athletes or active
Okay.
adults, something like that.
Yeah,
So
I get
you
it.
might have a more kind of considered strategy that's more kind of focus on a niche goal as opposed to kind of a broad level goal. But
Mm-hmm.
starting there, figuring out what your KPIs are and how you're gonna measure those metrics is the important starting point because that's going to
Mm-hmm.
drive everything else that you do.
Okay.
Um, Once you do that, make sure that you have a foundation for leading and converting or, yeah, generating and converting those leads.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly that means, do we have processes and systems set up that are optimized to make sure that the people that we engage with at some point when they decide they need physical therapy, it's very easy for them to do that. And I think we talked about this the last time I was on, the idea of like lead generation, lead nurturing,
Mm-hmm.
lead conversion. So making sure that those things are set in place is super important because otherwise, you know, you can't reach your goals if the people are getting to a point and then dropping off.
Yeah.
Once those things are set, and those are kind of like the baseline things, you move to looking at the key platforms and the key media that your target audience is going to be engaging with the most, that they
Okay.
use the most. So if we're talking about trying to reach kind of broad adults and, you know, people who need PT the most, low hanging fruit again, we might be looking at Facebook or email campaigns, things like that. If we're looking to move to younger demographics, we might start looking at Instagram, TikTok, you know, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you've decided where your audience is, you have to figure out what are the messages that they're going to engage with the most, and
Mm-hmm.
the ways that you can speak to them that would be the most interesting to them. So you kind of marry those things together to create good content.
Now, as you're going through this step-by-step approach, the thing that's going through my mind is, okay, what's the difference here? And I probably should have asked this at the beginning. What's the difference between a marketing strategy and content strategy?
Yeah. So really, it's a good question because the two kind of conceptually overlap a lot,
Okay.
but in action are going to be different.
Okay.
Mostly that the marketing strategy in totality is driving all of your marketing communications. So, you know, if you're figuring out your brand identity and your messaging and things like that, and where your audience is, but you're doing it on traditional media like radio or TV or print or things like that, then the execution for that's going to be a little bit different, obviously. You might be doing those things, but doing it through relationship development with doctors, with community events and sponsorships.
Okay.
You are taking those messages and brand identity and things like that and moving them to those avenues. So the difference is with the content piece, taking them to the right platforms, the right media, and then getting to the next point, which is actually strategizing and planning the content that you're putting together, which is
Okay.
when you get to the content marketing piece beyond the strategy of how do we plan out for the year, for the quarters, for the month, for the weeks, and daily, what the content is going to be that kind of comprehensively encompasses all of the platforms, the media, the messages, and the key topics that we want to focus on
Right.
in a way that is considered, consistent, speaks to the audiences we're trying to speak to, but it isn't, just hammering this one thing or this other thing. It's pretty, like I said, comprehensive. It flows pretty well throughout the year. So
So
that's
could
moving
you say the content
action.
strategy is kind of a subset of the marketing strategy, in that it has to do with those channels that you're using that are going to require content, whereas marketing, like you said, could be community-based, physician relationships, but that doesn't necessarily relate to your content that you're putting out via email, social media channels, text, etc.
Correct. And the difficulty in talking about it with these kind of from like a broad perspective is that, and one of the things we're trying to do every day, but with our strategy, for the whole year and years ahead, PTSMC, is find the best ways to integrate these things together, because again, in execution they are different, but in conception there should be a lot of overlay. So
Right.
how can you look at new ways to use the type of content that you might be putting together digitally, or for a social media audience or whatever? How can you take that and use it for relationship development? We're looking
Yeah.
for new ways to say, okay, we're bringing, I think I mentioned this in a recent Impact article, actually, or maybe one that's coming out soon. An example of this would be, we started putting together a quarterly newsletter, print newsletter that we
Sure.
put together for referring physicians, as a way to have a reason to follow up with them, have
Right.
news to share with them,
Exactly.
introduce new concepts in physical therapy to them, things like blood flow restriction, or things they might not be familiar with. But we're also putting together videos that introduce something like blood flow restriction to our audiences online, specifically, let's say, young athletes and active adults. So how do we share that type of video within the newsletter that we're putting together? So you put together an article that's more, speaking the language of the physicians, but then a QR code that goes to the video that we put together that shows it in
Yeah.
action. So you're trying to find ways to kind of cross-pollinate these pieces of content from digital to traditional. So that's where these things really overlap.
Yeah, it sparks an idea in my mind that I heard from another podcaster who does webinars, classes, that kind of stuff. But his rule of thumb is, whenever I generate some kind of content, I want to see a path in which I can reuse it at least 3 times.
Yeah.
So one time for the initial purpose, but chunks or pieces of it for a social media ad or some kind of testimonial or something kind of that. So he just wants to create content that's going to be used over and over again in different portions of his business. So to think of it as an opportunity to take advantage of that content, I think that's a good mindset to have.
Yeah, and I think, especially if we're talking about clinic owners or clinicians whose main job is to, treat their patients or run a business, saying you got to create 5 videos a week to be sharing or whatever you're going to be doing just is not tenable for their sanity or their productivity. So, creating one good video and finding different ways to use it across medium, platform, and channels, things like that, is the best use of everyone's time. And finding ways to move that to the traditional or in real life world as well, it's just beneficial beyond the kind of digital and social world. So
Right.
that's helpful for everyone. I would note that as we talk about this, and I want to move back to the idea of the kind of a topic calendar, what I call a topic calendar, different than a content calendar, putting both of those things together is also the best way to be doing that, because then when we are creating these things, we map that out for ourselves. So we say,
Oh,
what is
okay.
the key? So I would differentiate. So topic calendar for us, we break out quarterly. What are the key 3 to 4 kind of broad level topics that we want to focus on with much of our content, not all of it, but much of it. An example of that might be, it's spring right now, so we want to talk about TPI golf fitness performance training. We
Cool.
want to talk about preventing injuries for spring sports athletes. We want to talk about the benefits of dry needling, and maybe something else. So we're going to map out, okay, we're going to do one video for dry needling. We're going to do 2 videos for this. We're going to do 2 videos for this. We're also going to do an information packet that links to those videos. That's like maybe 5 pages long that gives a broad overview of the benefits of dry needling and, things like that. We're going to do a couple of infographics with statistics that cover it. We're going to pre-create all of that stuff and just have it ready to go, and then create our monthly and weekly and daily content calendar and start plug and play. We're going to do one dry needling thing every single week. So we'll just kind of cover that for every Tuesday and, plan it out that way. So there is a way to be really considerate about both what you're creating and also how you are using it consistently and across these platforms without just having to struggle and kind of fly by the seat of your pants.
Well, I think that's one of my issues, and that's the beauty of this concept is you are predetermining the topics well ahead of time, because to sit down in front of a screen and think of what am I going to talk about this time can be it just drives me nuts. I have no clue what to do at that point, and I have to spend a lot of brain energy just deciding what topic I'm going to create content about. But you're saying part of the content strategy, however, is to predetermine that content ahead of time, and that way what you're going to talk about. You just have to now create the content for it. You don't have to pick a topic, and it's strategic. It's intentional as well, that we're going to focus on these topics for this time of year, or because this is a new program, or I have this new employee, or that kind of thing. Predetermine those topics ahead of time, so that you don't have to spend your energy on determining what the topic is. Just when March rolls around, exactly when December rolls around later this year, then we know in December that topic's predetermined. We now just have to create the content.
Yeah. And also the goal is that it really builds back up into or fits into your marketing strategy, right, and your content strategy with the messages and the topics and the kind of key things that you want to be promoting for your brand. So if your goal this year is to increase new patients within active adults by introducing to them, so let's say that's the goal, and then the objective within that goal is to introduce to that audience ways in which physical therapy is both cutting edge on the healthcare front, and also, is an option for injury prevention or injury treatment right now. Then you can start building out your topics on things like, dry needling or blood flow restriction, and figuring out ways to present that message. So again, content wise, it's interesting content, and it says, interesting things about what you're doing. But, on the broader scale, it's presenting a message about physical therapy as a whole, about the type of benefits that we provide to patients, and your organization more specifically about you being, it aligns you or positions you as a forward-thinking kind of progressive physical therapy provider. And that might be one of your differentiators, that we don't provide this kind of old school style of PT. We're cutting edge, so it's all kind of rolling back up into these broader messages.
Well, I love that you're talking about it, because I think a majority of the time what you see, or what you see and consume from physical therapy owners is a little bit more generic and general, this is how you get rid of low back pain kind of content. Whereas with a little bit of a strategy and with a little bit more intention and forethought, you can be more specific about what is out there nowadays and how it's incorporated into your practice. Or you can speak specifically to the demographic that you've already predetermined that you want to focus on, and what kind of issues they're having, instead of being so generic, so broad, that you're almost irrelevant and just a voice in a crowd of voices. When you have some intention and some strategy behind it, now you can speak right to the point and to the person that you want to talk to.
Yeah, I mean, it's the difference between talking about why physical therapy is great, which we should all do all the time, because there's, so much there's so many more people we can be reaching with these services, and we know that. I think I mentioned this last time, and you've probably heard the stat of like, was it 90% of people who need PT don't get it? So I
Right.
mean, there's a big enough pie for everyone to be getting to. But if we're only talking about the benefits of PT, and not the specific benefits of our type of PT, then you're not telling anyone why they should come to you. You're just telling people why they should come to PT generally.
Mm-hmm.
So the more specific, I mean, that's a great message to be putting out there, and we try to do that as well. But then the more specific you can be to your brand identity and your differentiators, is it the culture of your offices that you present? Is it the kind of individualized approach? Is it the younger staff that you have that kind of speaks more to the younger people who you want to see?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the cutting edge thing? Any of these things could be differentiators. I'm sure most people would say yes to all of those things, but you got to find, I'm being a little broad on purpose. You got to find the things that kind of speak specifically to you. So
Yeah.
it's important to do both of those things, but the more considerate and intentional you can be about that, the better. And I'll qualify just one more thing, because I don't want it to sound like we have the rest of the year planned out day by day for what we're going to do.
Yeah.
We try to plug and play certain things that we know we're going to do. So we try
Sure.
to do Tuesdays as testimonial Tuesdays. So we might not have
There you go.
that content put together yet. We try to preload it for like a month maybe,
Yeah.
but we at least know that Tuesday is going to be testimonial Tuesday. We typically try to leave maybe one day open a week for relevant news stories or photos that we get from the clinics or things like that. And the rest of the time, it's like, okay, we may not have this video put together yet, but we know we're going to put a video together based on or focusing on the topic of vertigo and vestibular. So, if we plug it in for Monday, June 6th, or whenever, I don't know what date that is,
Sure.
that we're going to reach out to someone and try to collaborate and have that put together for that date. Again, as a marketing team, we have the benefit of being able to do that. But if you, as a clinician or clinic owner, at least have the time to sit down for a couple of hours and put together for the next 2 quarters what your topics are and what your monthly kind of focuses are going to be and how that builds into a weekly schedule, you can start talking to your clinicians like, hey, Rob, would you mind putting together a 2-minute demo for me on how you might assess a patient coming in with suspected vertigo or vestibular issues, and
Mm-hmm.
then plug that in. So it at least provides you the opportunity to start to reach out to others and have them do the work for you. Or if you're working
Yeah.
with an outside agency or whatever, you can, have them build that in.
Well, I love what you're talking about, because it's a time management thing, essentially what you're talking about, right? I mean, you're building in your time management strategies for your content strategy or content production. And I recognize the same thing on a very much a lower scale. Like, I put out monthly newsletters to the physicians that refer to us for EMGs. And I know that I have to put it, like, say the second of each month. I have it on my calendar, set aside an hour specifically to generate the newsletter content for that month. Now, I don't have the topics predetermined like you do, but what I do have is I have a bank or a library of past newsletters that now I can refer to and say, oh, I'll scan through those and see what content I can copy and paste and generate, just reuse some of that stuff again, like I talked about earlier. And so setting aside the time on your calendar helps a ton, right? And that's one thing that I think is most important about an overall marketing strategy. And one of the deficiencies that I see with most clinicians is that their marketing strategy isn't consistent and it's not calendared. Like, they don't look forward ahead. They don't plan forward ahead enough to make it consistent and ongoing. So it's almost like the calendar reminding you of what needs to be done, instead of you thinking, oh, that's right, weren't we going to do a testimonial on a Tuesday sometime? Now the calendar guides you versus leaving it up to any individual to create that content, right? And I love that aspect of it.
The tail wagging the dog, right? You're the,
right.
you're the dog, and you're getting wagged by your own calendar. I mean, especially for clinicians who are you have set schedules, and you might
Right.
have an open block or two, but if you can build that into your schedule once a month, and I'm sure many of the clinicians listening do that for their notes and things like that. So, it's building that time in, I think, as much as you can
Mhm.
to I think twofold, to figure out those content pieces and how they work into the topics that you've set and things like that, but also to take a step back to think about, how does this work towards our goals? How does
Right.
this,
Right.
think about the bigger picture for a second.
Mhm.
How does this reinforce our brand identity? How does this reinforce the messages that we want to focus on for this year? It gives you some more perspective too. So I think that's all helpful.
Yeah, and the way I'm envisioning it, because I've never come up with content strategy before, is that it doesn't have to be a long drawn out process, especially if you're a smaller operator. You have a team and you have 31 clinics, but on a smaller scale, coming up with some of that could all fit on one page. What we're talking about, right? You have your purpose and values and mission statement at the top, who your demographic is / avatar, whatever you want to consider, what your KPIs you want to measure this next year, how do you want to affect them, some of the resources that you're going to use or channels that you want to use, where that demographic is going to be. Of course, you want to go to their watering holes, and then start laying out some of the strategies for the next year without having to come up with all the content. Just strategize what some of the topics are that you want to hit for that demographic, when you want to do it, put it on the calendar. I mean, are you close to being done at that point?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like creating a map before a long road trip.
Sure.
You're
Yeah.
going to sit down, and even nowadays, when you're not going to have like a physical map with you, but you'll probably, if you're going to do like a multi-day road trip or something like that, you're going to lay out like, this is the route that we're going to take to get to this end goal.
Right.
But we know that we want to stop every 2 hours for a bathroom break and to grab a
Mm-hmm.
snack. So we need to set those parts of the route to say, what are we going to want to eat? Because we don't want this or this. So you might move your route this way or this way a little bit. You might say we want to go see this tourist attraction. So you're kind of like, yes, we know what the end goal is, and then we're starting to fill in the pieces of, how do we get there in the way that is most appropriate for us and what we want to do. So yes, I think, taking that time, and that's most of the work, right? And then at the end of it, it's just doing the drive. It's just doing the
Right.
thing.
Yeah. No, you
Um,
just got to
so,
drive.
yes, although I will say, creating content, depending on how much you want to put into it, can be time consuming as well.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
where it kind of comes into the concept of templating things out. Again, I'll go back to the testimonial Tuesday to say we try to do one video testimonial a month because that takes a little bit more time.
Sure.
But other than that, we have a template, a graphic template that we've already created, and we plug
Sure.
reviews that come in on Google or that people send to us via email, or we might ask some patients like, would you be willing to write something and take a picture? But that's
Gotcha.
like low effort stuff. So
Right. Right.
the kind of recurring things that you're doing, how can you create a template for it that makes the effort low for you, so
Definitely.
that the more kind of high impact pieces that you want to do, videos or info packets or blog posts or whatever, you can
Mhm.
spend the time doing that and not having to worry about, again, like sitting down on a Tuesday, how the hell am I going to put this together?
Yeah, exactly. And is there a whole lot more to it than that in terms of a content strategy? Is there anything
Um,
we're missing at this point?
I would say, well, kind of a broader. So, when you're thinking about, putting together the topic calendar and the content calendar and get it going from the year to the quarter to the month, the week to the day,
Mm-hmm.
a big consideration. This is more of a broad marketing concept that comes from, I think, Gary Vaynerchuk, who's a very
Sure.
well-known marketer, and I'm sure you probably know, is the 75-25 rule. I think that's how the percentages broke down. Mostly, so the idea is that 75% of the content that you're providing is brings some kind of value to the audience, and 25% of it is the ask. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
75% giving something,
Mm,
25% asking for something. And
okay.
if you take anything from that, I mean, while you're building out your calendar, you don't need to start like doing the mathematics of like, am I doing this 75% of the time?
Right.
But that the majority of the content that you're putting together should be giving something to your audience and not asking for something in return. One of the main mistakes I see in content that people are putting out is that they might like share a news link or a photo one day, and then the next day they say, they ask for people to come into their clinic, or, if you're looking at a restaurant, they ask for people to come to their restaurant, whatever it is. And then they just kind of do back and forth. So it's like kind of half and half. The worst ones are the people that just self-promote to say, this is why I'm the best, you should come see me. That's not interesting to anyone, and nobody wants to engage with it. So, you have to think first, what are we giving of value to the audience? And then, once you've kind of created that engagement, then you can put out the CTAs, the calls to action, because they're also relevant. You've kind of primed the pump a little bit.
Yeah, I like that. And just to give you, I think the overall generalization that it's okay to provide information and value, but it's also okay at times to intersperse that with a call to action, like, hey, this is what we do, and this is why we're great, and this is why you should call us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, first of all, what you said, I think is good, that it's okay to provide information and stuff like that. And I think a lot of the people that I've talked to in the past, both in physical therapy and, outside in other industries, struggle with that concept if they're not in marketing, that it is okay to do something with theoretically no benefit to you. Like, you're just giving this away. Right. I even talk about this with some PTs now. Like, why would we tell people how to, not prevent injuries? That sounds mean. Why would we tell people how to deal with their low back pain on their own for now, when we are the ones who want to be treating it? And it's like, well, because you want to create trust with the audience. You want to have engagement with the audience. You want them to trust you and to see you as a legitimate, authoritative voice in the field, so that when they actually do need to come see you, they're going to trust that you're the right person to do it. So it is a long-term consideration, but also it's just the best way to create a kind of strong, engaged audience. So that actually brings me to a point that I wanted to bring up when we're moving from the concept of content strategy to the marketing, actionable marketing side of it. This idea of what is good content, because we were talking about what is good content is not this, just like reposting and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So I would recommend people who are kind of thinking about this and trying to figure out the best way to go about it for themselves, to look up something called the Content Marketing Matrix. Has a really good, simple, kind of clear visual breakdown of kind of what they designate as the 4 key components of good content. And a lot of these things kind of overlap. So it's actually a matrix where, some of the things might be closer to the center, some might be farther out. But those 4 things are good content is either entertaining, inspirational, educational, or convincing. And some of these things sound like they overlap for good reason. So educational versus convincing might be kind of similar, but convincing would be just good stats that you have that show the benefit of seeking a physical therapist before seeing, an orthopedist or something like that. Sure. Educational would be, an info packet that uses those stats to tell a whole story about why PT first for low back pain is the right approach. So, that's going to be kind of in the middle there. But if you can put those 4 things together, certainly if you can make all those things entertaining, which is very hard to do, then you've got content. And it doesn't need to be polished either. I think when people hear me say that, they think that I'm saying you need to hire a video production team to put together this really kind of polished and coordinated video. But it could just be one of your clinicians speaking to the camera with the aide, just showing off these things and kind of having some personality while they're doing it. So keeping those things in mind, a good way to create some good content.
Is it true? I have to remind myself, at least when I'm generating these newsletters to physicians, at least, as I'm creating the content, I have to remind myself, simply getting out the product is more important than the content itself. Is there some truth to that at all?
I would say yes, if the product that you're getting out there covers one of those bases. And also so that's the content matrix piece of it. There's three things that I like to focus on too that kind of builds into that. So you mentioned one of them, consistency, but in this with this particular definition, I'm using consistency to talk about your brand personality, your messaging, your key topics, and things like that. But I would say if you are creating something that is either entertaining, inspirational, educational, or convincing, and it's got your consistent brand messaging or kind of promotional messaging involved in it, then yes, that's worthwhile. Is it clear? Do you have a clear message, or are you muddling it with some other things? So consistency, clarity of message, brand differentiation, things like that. And then frequency is kind of what you were speaking to before, which is the piece of saying, we're creating these clear, consistent messages, but we're doing it once every other week. That's not helpful for anyone either. So, that's, I would say, the key components of once you're putting good content together, making sure it's really doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Cool. And then is that creating good content is a portion of that? You used the phrase value content in the past. Mm-hmm. Is that another part of creating good content?
I would say value content is like what I would call like the meatier pieces of content that you're putting together. Okay. And those are typically the pieces that you can cross-pollinate with other channels and start taking out into the real world too. So good content might be a video that you put together that talks about, the benefits of physical therapy for vertigo patients or whatever. Just bring that up because I think I just wrote something about it last week. But it might just be like a funny little video that tells you one little thing about. That's not really like, it's fun, it's entertaining, it's a little educational. That's great. Value content would be that info packet that I was talking about that you can serve digitally and in person. You can print out and give in person that has, links or QR codes to the other videos that inform. So it's more comprehensive. It's got a lot of valuable information in it. We did one last year that we saw a lot of engagement with, that we put some budget behind to promote to a targeted audience. I think it was adults, 35 plus within our service areas. That was the 13 daily mobility exercises that you can do to just feel and move better on a daily basis. And that's just value content that, again, how much value can we bring to a target audience that speaks to them and gives them things that they're looking for that would be helpful for their lives, that doesn't really bring anything back to us. But what it does for us is it creates brand awareness, it creates brand trust and authority, creates recall if they're looking at it and using it on a daily basis, so that if and when they do need physical therapy down the line, they think of us first.
Yeah. And I think that's what you were alluding to when you mentioned Gary Vaynerchuk. Well, you didn't mention Gary Vaynerchuk in that one, but Gary Vaynerchuk's words came to my mind when you were talking about providing content that doesn't have, it's that 75%, not the 25%. Because when he was talking about it, he was saying, you're telling them what to do, but they're going to come back to you to figure out how to do it. Right. Right. So I can tell you all kinds of stuff about my coaching program, how to help you be a better PT owner and how it's going to get you profits and freedom, and write a blog post on that every day. But to get you to implement it, it's a different story. I can tell you the what, but how is when they're going to come back and use you. Plus, it's also going to set you up as quote unquote the expert. And they're going to want to talk to the expert because there's always nuance to it. There's custom issues that come up in different clinics, no matter what the program is. And so they'll want someone to apply that information into their lives, right? And so I think there's a value in that.
And that's where that idea of trust and authority and leadership comes into play is, can you create that level of trust where the audience truly believes, and because it's true, by the way, this isn't like some kind of underhanded thing. They believe that you have their best interest at heart, and that you are not looking for anything from them right now. You are just giving them good information. And then they come to you because they trust you. So it's a win-win on both sides. And like I said, it's a long-term game. If you want to get a little bit more in the weeds about it, which I always tend to do because this stuff's super interesting to me, the real benefit of something like value content that you can use across these different channels is in creating it as a really legitimate lead generation piece, which is to say, if you can start gating the content, this would mostly be digitally, although you could do it in person. I'll give you an example of what that means. So if you create something like the 13 mobility exercises and you put a budget behind it on social media within the channels that you know, or the platforms that you know that audience is going to be, and then when they click through to it, they get a little bit of the information, and then they can download the entire packet for free. We just need their name and email. That's called gated content.
Okay.
They get the thing for free. We get their name and email. In person, that would be if you are at a race or an event and you have a bunch of these printed out packets,
right.
You can give it out to people. You just want them to sign their name and email. Easy enough. So you say, we're not looking to like sell you anything. We're just going to send you some follow-up information. So right. Now you have their name and email, you have a lead, they've gotten something of value that hopefully they find useful so that they're kind of trusting you anyway. And then you can start doing follow-up communication with them with other good, useful information. You know, maybe the next time you reach out to them, you say, it sounds like you might have some mobility problems because you downloaded this packet. Here's some information or a video that we put together about, you know, alleviating low back pain. Maybe the third or fourth time you reach out to them, you say, hey, by the way, we're doing, you know, a special for this. Or in our case, we might reach out at the end of the year and say, did you know that if you've met your insurance deductible, you can come see a physical therapist at likely no cost to you because of the deductible has been met, and also without a doctor's referral. So there's the ask. It's maybe 2, 3, 4 emails or communication points down the line, but you've nurtured that lead the entire time. And now they're like, oh, you know, I didn't know that I could come see you at no cost to me with no doctor referral. And also I trust you and you've given me all this good information. I'm going to come in and see you. So, you know, it's a win-win again. You know, they're getting all this great information. And at some point down the line, you make the ask and you've kind of earned it.
What the entire time you're thinking is, so you're telling people to never go to another community event or race like that without getting names and email addresses, so you can capitalize on that information and send them some content later on, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really what other way for that type of event or like sponsorship or anything, like what other way do you have to prove the return on investment for the
exactly. I mean, you're hoping that your goodwill translates and that your name gets out there, but that, I mean, how quickly do people forget? They don't even remember the name of the person that was helping them maybe at the race or talk to them about their condition at the fair that they're at, right? But if you're able to capture that name and email address, you can continue to send them content and get in front of them for going forward.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I get into, and this has been an ongoing friction point, I think, for a lot of marketers versus clinicians or owners, is the value of something like free assessments.
Right.
Because if you're at an event like that and if you want to call it a free consultation or whatever it is, you just say, if you want to talk to me for 5 minutes about why your shoulder hurts every time you raise it above your head, let's have that conversation. And I'll prove to you that I'm not looking for anything from you, because I might say to you, you know, take some time, don't do any lifting for the next 2 weeks. And if it's still hurting you, here's my card, give me a call. Even better, if you can say those things and then say, put your name and information here, we'll follow up with you and just make sure everything's good. Or we'll send you some information on, you know, stretches you should be doing to alleviate shoulder pain. And again, we're not asking for anything from you. You're still creating that connection. But that is a form of content or value that you're providing. It's just you know, much more interpersonal. There tends to be some pushback to that, but I see it valuable. Any way that you can create that connection is good.
Gotcha. Well, anything else you want to add in terms of content strategy for today's purposes?
I think I would roll it back up, because this is what I tend to do when I start getting really down into the granular, and then I need to pull back and say, well, okay, what are we talking about? Keeping in mind that this is rolling up into your broad marketing strategy, you know, always start with the goals, and then always think about, you know, what is the conversion point to reach those goals? If it's, you know, getting new patients in the door, depending on which audience you're talking to. If you're talking to older people, it might be a phone call. You're talking to younger people, it might be an online submission, whatever it is. what are the way, and then move backwards. What are the ways that we can engage with those audiences, and then move backwards to, okay, what are the ways that we can make them aware of us to begin with? So the entire content strategy, working down into the content marketing that you're doing, still fits within the framework of lead generation, lead nurturing, and lead conversion. You're just fitting it there. So what are the pieces of content that will create that type of awareness and engagement? What are the pieces of content that will nurture these leads? And then how can we kind of convince them to convert once that need is there?
Right, definitely. Well, thanks for your time and the share today, Peter. Really appreciate it. If people had questions, are you open to sharing your contact information?
Oh yeah, yep. Do you want me to share that now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. My email is peter.decoteau. It's DECOTEAU at ptsmc.com.
All right, cool. And like I said in introducing you, you can always see, I see your articles almost monthly in the Impact magazine, and thank you for doing so. That's awesome that you share that marketing information, but I reference people back to those articles to check out the content that you've shared in the past for sure, and look forward to them in the future. But thanks for sharing today.
A lot of ground in those. We do a lot of content stuff, but we talk about a lot of traditional media. We talk a lot about return on investment, proving that with benchmarks and stuff like that. So we're covering a lot of ground.
And you really cover a lot of information within the marketing arena. I would, even the smaller practice owners, I'd recommend you read those, because you'll always be able to pull out singular nuggets of information that you can implement into your practices fairly easily, considering the broad topic that you're usually talking about, or all the intricate parts of it.
That's the goal. Yep.
Yeah.
And again,
awesome.
I always say the rising tide for PT lifts all of our boats, because
that's right, man.
There's a big portion of the population out there that we're not reaching yet. So lots of opportunity for all of us.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me today, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.